1 minute to places. All right, welcome to the, believe it or not, 32nd ever Sunday Assembly in San Diego. It's September 25th, a might bit toasty morning, and it's going to be a toasty day. Before we get started today, I want to make sure you know we have a media-free zone, so we are recording this event. If you do not want to be videotaped or photographed, please have a seat in designated area. And also, before we get too far along, I want to make sure you know we're going to be playing an Icebreaker shortly. The Icebreaker will be, you're going to pair up with somebody and you're going to tell them 2 truths and a lie. And then they have to determine which one is the lie. I'm giving you a little chance to think while we hear the lovely music of the man who's been here for all 32 assemblies, Mr. Paul Svensson.
Good morning. So we're going to do the only song that Ringo ever had a hit with, because we can. Let's all stand up, unless, of course, you don't want to, then you can stay seated. I'd like to be, here we go. I like to be under the sea, in an octopus's garden, in the shade. He let us in, knows where we've been, in his octopus's garden, in the shade. I'd ask my friends to come and see an octopus's garden with me. I like to be under the sea, in an octopus's garden. Not bad, not bad. Everybody stand up straight, shake off your shoulders, get a little air going. Put on your best Ringo, here we go. We would be warm below the storm, in our little hideaway beneath the waves, resting our heads on the seabed, in an octopus's garden near a cave. We would sing and dance around, because we know we can't be found. I like to be under the sea, in an octopus's garden. Take it, George Harrison. I can't do that part, but I can sing it. And we would shout and dance about the poor old little eyes. Okay, stop. There's a parenthesis part there. That's a harmony part. I know that some of you, I won't make you raise your hands or even invite you to, some of you at one point in the life sang in a choir in high school, or a choral group in a church, or you sang in some kind of a thing, and you sang harmony. That's where you're singing something different than what everybody else is singing. A lot of people do that, but it's not harmony. But anyway, so some of you choose those little parenthesis things there and just sing them like you know they should be going. Ready? We would shout and dance around the coral little eyes beneath the light. Oh, what joy for every girl and boy, knowing we're happy and they're safe. We would be so happy, you and me. No one there to tell us what to do. I like to be under the sea, in
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. Well, I haven't actually ever done this in one of the 32 assemblies that we've had, but I would like to publicly thank you, Mr. Paul Svensson, for being here every time. You're fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, the theme for today, and every Sunday assembly has a theme. Sunday assembly has a theme. Yes. The theme for today is Under the Sea. My name is Stephen Soden. I'll be your MC today. Today's a banner day at Sunday Assembly San Diego because we're bannerless. First time we've done that. So I'm glad you all found your way. Thank you very much. And I want to make sure you know we have a kids zone where we can watch children age 1.5 and up, and where they can read great books. So we got Star Stuff by Carl Sagan, and the compendium to your child bugging you over and over again, asking why, which is how come. And we have some fantastic artwork from the prolific Zephyr, who is here today. This is I Will Clean Up. That's a picture there. And here's a nice rainbow and also trees. So she's right out there if you want to get an autograph for any of these. We're keeping them. And then lastly, don't forget Play-Doh. So bring your kids, and it's an hour. We'll watch them. We have some highly competent people out there, and we will make sure that they are safe and ready to go. And welcome to Sunday Assembly. Sunday Assembly is a secular community, radically inclusive, that meets monthly to hear great talks, to connect for community events, to sing silly songs and have some snacks, but mostly just to celebrate this one life that we know that we have. And we're so glad you're here. How many of you are here for the first time for Sunday Assembly? Well, turn around and give those people a high five. Welcome to Sunday Assembly. So glad to have you here. Thank you very much. The motto for Sunday Assembly is live better, help often, and wonder more. And we've done so much in the last month. There's plenty of community events to hook up with, and we just had so much fun. Check the last page there. Just tons of things to do and ways to help out. We have a little portion of Sunday Assembly where we ask you to share some things out of your life with us, so I'll share those with everyone. It's called Life Happens. In my soccer game, I led in goals, but stopped at 6. Quinn, thank you. Quinn Costello, he was, Colello's, he's out there actually. Quinn's here today. Diane reports how she likes giving out leftovers or repurposing Sunday Assembly programs at the Secular Outreach booth in Balboa Park each Saturday. Thank you for doing that. This month's pointing out the Beatles and Monty Python songs. The activities on the calendar and the upcoming Dolphin talk were big hits. Some folks sounded interested. So maybe some of you are here today. So thank you for coming and thank you for doing that. That is awesome. Thanks so much. And then my daughter Crystal got married. That's from Elizabeth. Congratulations. Thank you. Our assembler Sandra Medina is not here today. She is with her family. Her aunt passed, so she's not here. So our thoughts are with her for sure. From Tally and Steve Cass, we have a part-time job opening for a storage consultant in Poway. There's office, sales, and customer service experience necessary. If you want to come see me after the assembly, I have the phone number for you to take a picture of right there. And that is it. Now we're on to the icebreakers. So here's what you're going to do. Is pick someone you don't know, because the other person some of you do know, probably will know you're lying. Pick somebody you don't know. You're going to tell them 2 truths and a lie, and they are to determine which one is the lie. And we'll give about 3 or 4 minutes for this. So just be brave. Go meet somebody you don't know. Go ahead, and let's go. All right, everybody, take a seat. You've had plenty of time. I tell you, it is amazing to see the connection people are making, looking in each other's eyes, talking to each other, communicating, and lying through your teeth. I love seeing that. It's fantastic. All right. Okay, everybody. To be continued after the assembly. At every assembly, we have a reading. And our reading today is It Is Born by Pablo Neruda and read by Anna Goldberg. Anna, will you come on up? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. All right, so here's a poem by Pablo Neruda. He's a poet from Chile, and it's one of several poems that captures his fascination with the ocean. Okay, so in English first. It Is Born by Pablo Neruda. Here I come to the very edge where nothing at all needs saying. Everything is absorbed through weather and the sea. And the moon swam back, its rays all silvered. And time and again, the darkness would be broken by the crash of a wave. And every day on the balcony of the sea, wings open, fire is born, and everything is blue again, like morning. Now here's the poem in its native tongue. Nace, por Pablo Neruda. Yo aquí vine a los límites en donde no hay que decir nada. Todo se aprende con tiempo o océano, y volví a la luna, sus líneas plateadas, y cada vez se rompía la sombra con un golpe de ola. Y cada día en el balcón del mar abre las alas, nace el fuego, y todo sigue azul como mañana.
Anna, thank you. Marvelous job. Thanks so much. Today's speaker, Nellie Shaul, is an academic editor at Research Square, a publishing services company for scientific journals. And she's also a Ph.D. candidate in marine chemistry at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. In addition to her research, Shaul is heavily involved in teaching and outreach activities, a board member of the San Diego chapter of the Association for Women in Science and former chair of the Outreach Committee. She is also on the planning committee and board for the annual Expanding Your Horizons conference aimed at getting girls aged 11 to 16 interested in science, math, and engineering. We're so pleased to have her here. Please welcome Nellie Shaul.
Loud enough? Okay. My voice is sort of loud. Sometimes to the disdain of my fiance when we're out at restaurants. No, not loud enough. Okay, is that better? Okay, I'll sort of really project. Well, I don't think this one's on. Is that better? Okay. So, thank you guys for inviting me to speak today. It's always nice to be able to talk to different audiences. I don't talk to non-chemists very much, so hopefully I can do a good job in conveying my research to you in a digestible manner. And in thinking about what I was going to focus on for this talk, it's sometimes difficult for me to convey the importance of this work and not coming across as being overly alarmist. The chemistry and methods that I developed with my colleagues in this work are very novel and interesting to other chemists, but not always to a general audience. And a lot of what I'll present to you today could be interpreted as toxins are everywhere in our food and chemicals are just out to get us and threatening our very existence on this planet, which obviously isn't the case. But it got me thinking that in recent years I've noticed a lot more chemophobic, if you will, ideas and attitudes being perpetuated, especially in arenas like social media. People like this online personality, the food babe, and yes, grown. Chemophobia is essentially the fear that all chemicals are bad, that there's toxins present in man-made products, and they're all harmful to us. And while it's great to make people aware where their food comes from, what's in their food, how it's processed. This has become kind of a haven for a lot of pseudoscience, and some of it's, to gain a profit in the end, things like detoxing systems and cleanses and stuff that just simply aren't based in science at all. And just as an example, this poster here, really only one of those bullet points has any scientific backing and is supported by evidence, and that's organic food by definition has lower pesticide residues. And that would be conventional pesticides. They still have to use ways to control pests, or their system would not be profitable. But by definition, it contains fewer pesticides, but there's no difference in nutrients, doesn't taste better. None of this else has any basis in scientific fact. There's nothing inherently wrong with organic foods, but just there's a lot of misinformation out there. The semantics in general in this arena have become rather twisted in that, toxins in our food, natural equals healthy all the time, man-made equals unhealthy. Things like that have just been falsely promoted. And the truth is, chemicals are everywhere, and everything is a chemical, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Scientific names are equally as complex, whether you're talking about something as natural as a banana or a food that's completely synthetic in its origin. And that's because the way we name things in science is very descriptive. Is this causing the feedback? Oh, okay. So this, okay. No, it's okay. And it's important to keep in mind that whether or not a chemical is toxic has absolutely nothing to do with its origin. Just as an example here, I have listed here two natural substances, Botox and table salt, as well as a man-made chemical that's Roundup, a pesticide. And this LD50 value is just something that's used in toxicology to compare the relative toxicities of different substances. And it's called the lethal dose 50, and it's the amount of a chemical that it takes to kill 50% of a given test population that you're testing on in the lab. And so the smaller the number, the more toxic the chemical, because it takes a smaller amount of that substance to kill different organisms or create the toxic effect. And so from these numbers here, we can see that just because something's natural does not mean that it's safer than something that's man-made. And the father of the field of modern toxicology, Paracelsus, coined the term, it's the dose that makes him poison. Anything can be toxic if you ingest enough of it. Water can be toxic if you ingest enough of it. And just one more example of this is in, sort of the more recent great vaccine debate, which shouldn't really be a debate at all, in that anti-vaxxers will commonly say, oh, there's toxins in vaccines that we're exposing our children to. Well, while that may be true, there are chemicals that have toxic effects contained in vaccines. They're generally at really low levels, and the human body is actually really well equipped to detoxify a certain level of chemicals that we encounter in the environment. We evolved that way. We can encounter things in nature that are toxic. You have to have mechanisms in place in your liver, for example, to be able to deal with these substances. And, in a sense, other than being a generally healthy individual, your body doesn't need help doing any of those detoxification mechanisms. However, as an environmental chemist, I'm obviously not going to stand up here and tell you that pollution isn't a problem and hasn't been a problem in the past. I wouldn't be studying what I'm studying today if that were the case. The modern environmental movement pretty much came about with the publishing of the book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in the 60s, I believe. And she put together the association of the previous liberal use of pesticides, such as things like DDT, and if you're an older person in the audience, you may actually remember DDT being heavily used throughout the United States as a pesticide, and it's still used in some parts of the world, actually, because it's really good at controlling mosquitoes. And in places where malaria is a problem, it's the only option that they have. And so, but she linked the use of DDT to the near extinction of many populations of birds of prey, and this got people's attention because they're such iconic birds. People love them, care about them. And so from that environmental movement, we now have agencies like the EPA and a lot of our regulations put into place. And we've benefited from that, and that a lot of these historic pollutants that have been banned in the 60s and 70s from this movement are now their concentrations are now starting to decline in the environment. However, as our society changes, we have new impacts that we could potentially be putting on the environment. And we need ever-evolving ways to be able to see how those impacts are changing. And therein lies kind of what we try to do with our study that I'm going to talk to you about today. And I just want to give a brief introduction to terminology so that everyone's kind of on the same page and I don't throw around terms that may be unfamiliar to anybody. And so when I'm talking about pollution, there's broadly two different types of pollution. There's pollution by metals, which are things like mercury, lead, arsenic. I'm not a metals chemist. I'm a chemist that studies organic chemicals. Now this is different than the use of the common use of the word organic, as in organic food, which means not using conventional pesticides. Pesticide chemicals in their nature are organic chemicals, because the definition in chemistry is anything that contains carbon and hydrogen atoms is an organic chemical. Pesticides, most pesticides, are based in carbon and hydrogen in their molecular skeleton. And so our study specifically focused on organic chemicals that are persistent in the environment, meaning that they are resistant to degradation once they're released, so they hang around for a long time and they have toxic effects, which is why they're of concern to us. And of these, I'm just going to throw one more term out there. We specifically focused on halogenated organic chemicals, and those most persistent organic pollutants are halogenated organic chemicals. Hopefully that's not all too confusing. All that means, the halogen part, is that they contain an atom in their structure from column 7 on the periodic table, which is a halogen. And most of these contain chlorine and bromine. So the chlorine, you know, is the stuff that you throw in your pool, common chemicals. So that's all, those are the types of chemicals. I'm not talking about pollution in the sense of every single type of pollution out there. I'm talking about a specific type of pollution because they persist in the environment, they accumulate up food chains, and they have toxic effects. And the poster child for this class of chemicals is DDT, and I'm just showing the structure up there for anyone who might care. You can see the chlorine atoms on the carbon skeleton backbone. So as humans, we're exposed to these types of chemicals as well as a lot of other chemicals throughout our lives in many other different ways. We're exposed to trace levels of these pollutants just in our everyday walking around, air, soil, water. And when I say trace levels, I mean the concentrations are generally at the part per million or part per billion level, so really small, unless you're in like a dumping site or a hazardous waste site or something like that. We're exposed to a little bit higher levels actually in our indoor environments. House dust contains pretty high levels of some of these compounds within this class, particularly things like industrial chemicals that we use in the products that are in our homes, and then flame retardants that have to be sprayed on our furniture and other things because of our high flame retardant standards. Side note that actually Californians have the highest levels in the world of some of these flame retardant chemicals in our tissues because we have such high fire standards. So these things, again, they persist and they accumulate in our fatty tissues. I could analyze the fat of anyone in here and we would have all of these chemicals that I would be able to detect in there, but still at very trace levels. But by far and away, the biggest source of exposure to humans on average is through our diet. And that's either through the direct spraying of pesticides on the foods that we're eating or on animal feed that then we're consuming those animals' tissues, or through a process known as bioaccumulation. And I'm just going to briefly go over this. I debated taking this slide out, but just in case anyone's interested, something like DDT that was banned years ago, it's still hanging out in the soil, sediment, in the environment. How would we even get exposed? Why would we even care? Well, these things hang around and then they can sometimes break down, but the breakdown products, which are very similar in structure, if you can pay attention to those chemical structures over there and see only the slight difference, they're often just as toxic or more toxic than their parent compound. So those things are present in the environment as well. And then being bound to things like particles and sediment, they get ingested by filter feeders and will accumulate all the way up the food chain. And because they're stored in tissues and we don't excrete them out readily, these chemicals accumulate each step of the food chain. And who sits at the top of the food chain but us? So that's how humans are typically exposed to both old and new pollutants in the environment. But another piece to this puzzle that I want to throw out there, because it was a significant finding of our study, is that you can paint a similar picture for compounds, chemicals that look very similar. Oh, sorry, I didn't click fast enough. That look very similar in their chemical structure. If you look at those carbon skeletons, it looks kind of the same as in the previous slide. However, we know for a fact that these things are produced by bacteria and algae in the surface ocean or on land for chemical defense typically. Organisms like sponges that can't move will just shoot out chemicals and be like, get away, predators. And they're commonly chemicals like this, which also then accumulate up the food chain to similar levels. So we don't know much about these natural analogs, but they're natural. Does that mean they're safe? No, some of them actually exhibit the same mechanisms of toxicity as the man-made pollutants. So what does that mean when we think about our pollution in the environment? So scientists have been monitoring a lot of these chemicals for many years at this point, especially the historic contamination. But we have to ensure that we're not introducing any new pollutants into the environment. So how do we do that? How do we look at samples? Well, typically you go take a soil sample, a tissue sample, something in the environment, and you think of that sample as containing an entire kind of chemical universe of the contaminants that might be in there, the chemicals that make up the sample itself, and everything. What most monitoring agencies will typically do is they'll say, I want to know what pesticides are in there. I'm going to look for X, Y, and Z. And if it's there, great. If it's not, great. But what does that tell us? And so that's called targeted analysis. You're specifically searching for specific chemicals, some of which don't overlap with the chemical universe. Those are the ones you didn't detect, and some of which do. However, when you target specific things, you might be missing other things that are present because you're not looking for them. And in terms of this type of pollution, what that can include are things like emerging chemicals of concern, so new things that we're using in products, et cetera, that we might be releasing and not even realizing that they're accumulating in the food chain. Degradation products of these historical contaminants that have different structures, so we're not seeing them with our detection methods, but they might be there and they might be having an effect. As well as these natural analogs, which are typically not monitored in most monitoring programs because people don't think they need to be concerned about them. However, can we expand this? And that's what our study sought to do. We basically sought to take samples and see, can we just, instead of saying, is X, Y, or Z there, what halogenated organic compounds are in the sample? Can we see pretty much all of them, or as many of them as we can? And that's called non-targeted analysis. Now, you were promised that you were going to get to hear about dolphin blubber today, and while that's true, I won't really be discussing the blubber in terms of its role for the dolphins themselves, but rather that it's a good sample in which we can detect these chemicals in. The samples are easily obtained when dolphins beach and wash ashore and are already deceased. No one, other than like me and people at NOAA really want that tissue. So it's free. You can just submit a permit and get as much dolphin blubber as you want. Side note. In case anyone's interested. Although it smells really, really bad, so I don't really recommend it. In addition, this is a really complex figure, but what you need to take away from it is that dolphins sit high on the food chain. And so as you move up the food chain, those chemicals are accumulating. That makes them easier for our instruments to detect, which is important, as well as they sit on a similar level of the food chain as humans do. And so they can be thought of as what's called a sentinel species, and it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine, whereas, for me to go and ask you for a sample of your fat tissue, I'd have to go through all these, permits and things. It's very difficult to get human samples of anything. So they can be thought of as, do we detect some chemicals in the dolphin tissue that then maybe we should be concerned about for human exposure because they sit at a similar trophic position. So our study analyzed dolphins that had stranded in the Southern California Bight region in our own backyard, and we used this non-targeted method to see what halogenated organic chemicals are present in this environment. And Southern California Bight is a little bit unique. We're actually kind of the DDT capital of the world, other than places where it's actively being used, because off of LA, there used to be the Montrose chemical plant produced DDT back in its heyday, and just would dump the barrels off into the Palos Verdes shelf, and they still sit there today. Most of it's contained in the sediments, but that presented a unique opportunity for us to follow where is DDT degradation at today and what new breakdown products could we potentially see. So what did we find? Oh, I thought you were asking a question. I forgot. 5 minutes. What did we find? Well, we found a lot of the expected pollutants, the traditional historic things that we would expect to find, especially in our environment. We also found, however, a lot of pollutants that we know have a man-made origin, but at this point they're not really being monitored because they were thought of either to not be very pervasive in the environment or just to not be of concern, but some of them do have known toxicities. We also found chemicals that have that natural source, but their structures are similar, therefore they behave in a similar way and accumulate in tissues. Probably to me the most interesting parts is that we found 94 unique chemicals to where we know they're halogenated organic compounds. We know they're accumulating. We know that their structures indicate that they could have some sort of toxicity. But beyond that, we don't know anything about them. And so these would be potential targets for further elucidation and potential recommendation to monitoring agencies. And overall, 73% of the chemicals that we detected in number are not currently on the radar for monitoring at all, or people really aren't looking for them. And, meaning that if these samples were taken and analyzed by a normal agency, they would have missed these chemicals that potentially could be exerting a toxic effect on the organism or in the environment, or we might need to be concerned about them. But it's also important to keep in mind that this pie is number of compounds, and we're still, the level, their concentration is still at the trace level, part per million, part per billion. So what that means is that we've painted a picture that most samples contain extremely complex mixtures of trace levels of compounds. Now what that means, that's sort of where the state of the science is. We don't know the effects of that. There have been studies that have potentially linked all of these complex mixtures to things like the increase in obesity over the years, et cetera, some of these chronic diseases that we're seeing at end of life, things like that. But there's really been no definitive answers as of yet. And they could have no effect at all because, again, our bodies do have mechanisms in place to deal with a certain level of toxicity. And additionally, the natural analogs are interesting because, as I said, a lot of these historic contaminants, their levels are declining in the environment thanks to our awesome regulations. So at some point, do the naturally produced chemicals become the dominant halogenated organic compounds in a sample? And if we as humans and other organisms, the environment's used to dealing with these, they've been produced for millions, billions, however long they've been around in the environment, is there a level or a baseline at which we don't potentially need to be concerned? Because there is such a thing as doing too much, and then you can focus your energies on maybe solving another problem. So overall, what I hope that you'll kind of take away from this is that you maybe have a little bit better of an understanding of what realistic pollutant exposure is, and when people talk about pollutants in the environment. And metals are a completely different story, and you can talk about incidents like the Fukushima disaster and stuff like that, and it's a whole different beast, and they behave much differently in the environment. So there's a lot of other things out there that you have to consider, but the reality is that we as humans, and what matters to you, we're exposed to these really complex mixtures of really low levels. But the current state of the science and what people, when I go give talks, I've talked about this all around the world, and it's people at the EPA, and they're all trying to figure out what this means, if anything. It's very interesting, and it's called there's initiatives about the Human Exposed Zone Project and all these things to just try and get a better picture of what's realistic for humans and what we need to be worried about and what we don't. But we first have to understand what's there, and that's why work like this is important. You have to know realistically what's in the environment and what is persisting. So as kind of consumers, we must be vigilant about what you put into your body, but you don't need to make yourself crazy. You're exposed to things no matter how, I don't want to know, anal, that's not the right word. Like you are about always eating organic, and I sometimes buy organic too, but you don't need to, again, stress induces chemical reactions in your body as well and can produce, nasty things. But chemicals are not always harmful, natural does not always equal safe, and the science will continue to move forward and hopefully, continue to provide us answers. So this was obviously a collaborative effort with a bunch of folks that I want to thank, and I thank you all for listening. Hopefully this was interesting to you.
Will you be able to stay after?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sorry, you're on. Thank you so much. Nellie, we'll stay after to answer questions if anybody has any. Talk about from the Wonder More style. That's just fantastic. How much we learn here at Sunday Assembly. It's such a great job. Thank you so much. Before I turn it over to Paul Svensson once again, I wanted to introduce you to, if you haven't met, there's one person who is undisputed in the world as having attended more assemblies than anyone else all across the world, and that's this gentleman right here, Mr. Jeff Sargent. Jeff is super cool. Yeah. So if you have a chance to chat with him afterwards, it's great. And he also, I know, is not shy to show his first of its kind Sunday Assembly tattoo, which he has on his arm there. So welcome, Jeff. Good to see you. Jeff's from the LA Assembly. Good to have you here.
All right,
thank you.
Jeff.
And now, Mr. Paul Svensson.
This is a sit-down song. I really was trying to write a song called Dolphin Blubber, which would have worked out just fine, but I failed miserably, so we'll sing a good song instead. I'm sitting in the morning sun. I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, then I watch them roll away again. Oh, I'm just a sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away, sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. You all sound good this morning. I left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. I've got nothing to live for, looks like nothing gonna come my way. So I just sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away, sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. Looks like nothing's gonna change, everything still remains the same. I can't do what 10 people tell me to do, so I guess I'll remain the same. I'm sitting here resting my bones, and this loneliness won't leave me alone. 2,000 miles I rode just to make that dock my home, and I just sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Ooh, I'm just sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. Pucker up, here we go. Not bad, try it again.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic. So it's time for a personal moment, and that is one of you sharing your story. Some of them have been funny, some of them have been heartbreaking, but we do ask you to please share with us. We'd love to hear from you also. Today we're going to hear from Mr. Joshua Rice. Joshua?
Morning, everyone. Good morning. On a hot July night, 2016, I pulled into the sea of empty spaces at the viewpoint. It was 12:30 at night. I had just got off work and was tired and sore. I decided to get out and stretch my legs before attempting the night's rest in my small Kia Rio. As I stood there, looking out into the moonlit valley below, everything came rushing back to me. All the paths taken that led me to this desolate place, and the separation from my kids came flooding into my mind, and the pain of it began to choke me from the inside. 4 years earlier, a fundamental change took place in my life. I had deconverted from a lifetime of devout Christianity. While my wife did not agree with this change, she accepted it bitterly, and life went on. In the summer of 2015, another change happened. After months of research, I discovered that I was wrong in a particular stance my wife and I had shared, and I could not continue in the lifestyle based on that stance, the anti-vaccine stance, any longer. So I brought my research to my wife, and this change in opinion was not met with acceptance, but with hostility and tears. There was also my growing concern that our children were behind academically because our attempt to homeschool them was proving a failure. This was the final ingredient in the cauldron of hate she had been brewing for years. After months of trying in vain to make the marriage work for the sake of our 3 beautiful kids, my life crumbled before my eyes. In the early weeks of November, my wife left me and the kids alone because she could not stomach being around me anymore. At the same time, I lost my job, which not only provided a stable income, but the very roof over our heads, as it was a live-on position. The kids and I took a 2-week vacation to Nashville after this to spend time with my family and regroup emotionally. It was there that my sister introduced me to Sunday Assembly. During that time, there was both a lot of processing what had come before and planning for what was to come. When we returned, the kids went with their mother to stay at their grandmother's house. I went to stay with a friend. On December 7th, our 10-year anniversary, my wife and I agreed to divorce, but we could not agree on the custody and the future of our children's health and education. For the next 6 months, I had to fight with her just to visit my kids. There was excuse after excuse given as to why I wouldn't be allowed to see them. Thankfully, by the end of those 6 months, the courts had intervened and I was getting fair time with them. But just as I was finally catching a break, I lost the place I had to stay in, and with my family and support in Nashville, I was forced into homelessness. I was working a full-time job I had acquired early in that 6-month period, but could not afford a place of my own. I was able to buy a very discounted but reliable used car, which, due to its red and blue paint and small size, I named Veronica's Prime, much to my kids' delight. I had that at least, but as for the homelessness, which greatly inhibits my time with the kids, there seemed to be no end in sight. So on that hot night in July, tear-stained eyes staring out into the valley under the light of the moon, feeling utterly hopeless, I remembered something my sister told me weeks before. She told me that I chose to be where I was, and all the struggles I was facing, I faced deliberately, purposefully. She reminded me that at any moment I can return to Nashville, to my family, to my career, to my home, but I don't. You see, my time here, my struggle is not in vain. It is full of purpose, the greatest purpose of my life. Because I am here, my kids remain enrolled in school. Because I am here, my kids' medical needs are being met. The fight to get them vaccinated wages on, but it continues because I am here. I struggle, my kids win. In that moment, the tears stopped. In that moment, I reflected on my self-appointed purpose in life, and I smiled. In that single moment, a confidence rose in me like a tidal wave that came crashing down on all the fear and doubt and washed it away. I was reborn as a fire burned within me. I made a vow in that moment, under the light of the moon. I vowed that I will never stop fighting, no matter how much I struggle, no matter how low I have to crawl. Even if I'm homeless until my youngest turns 18, I keep fighting. Those kids, those perfect, beautiful kids of mine are the greatest purpose I will ever know. Nothing will keep me from this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua, for sharing your story with us. Well, we are in need of volunteers to help run a Helping Hands response team that can respond to assemblers' emergencies and wrangle resources like an old-fashioned phone tree, but faster with the internet because it's 2016. We have a possible roadmap in place, so we met earlier and we put something in place that it's a really good starting point, but we're really looking for an organized person to bring it to life. If that's you, if you feel like you have time for that, we will have a lot of support. We'd appreciate you coming up and seeing myself or Laura right here, or Neil. Or you're welcome to send an email to custodiansasd@gmail.com, and certainly I'll share that with you if you're interested in helping out. Really appreciate it. Again, thank you.
And if any of you have any immediate ideas of figuring out how you can support Joshua, see me in the back after the assembly. We have some ideas about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. I forgot to remember to do that. Listening to Nellie Shaul talking about the consequences of what humans do that ultimately affect humans, and Joshua, the consequences of his choice for staying here and not going to Nashville where he has the support, I'd like to talk about consequences. Consequences are, some of them we accept them, just like jaywalking or speeding, which we will do 10 times out of the 10 unless there's an officer in the area. I know for myself, I was, when I was 8, it was a bad year for me. I was always a good kid, but I moved next door in Santa Rosa, California, to this kid named Randy, who was a year older than me, and apparently I was a sheep because we made a little fire on the side of the house, which got a little out of control, and got in big trouble for that. And we smoked a cigarette. I've outlined that here before with him, and got in massive trouble for that one. And I've apologized for this over and over again to my sister. She's forgiven me, but we mixed dirt into water and told my little sister that it was chocolate milk. I feel bad about that. And also, I was prohibited from watching anything scary. And I would go next door to my neighbor's house. They watched Dark Shadows, which was a 1960s horror soap opera. Which is, I've watched it. It's not really that scary, but when you're 8, it's frightening. And I had nightmares at night, and got myself busted for that one. And the worst one I think we ever did was my mother had, our whole backyard was all dirt, and it was full of rocks. And my mother had this idea that she wanted to get it cleaned out, so she paid all the kids in the neighborhood a penny a pound for the rocks. So all the kids are in the neighborhood are working in this backyard and diligently working, and so were Randy and I. And to augment our haul, we took 7 big garden rocks from his mother's garden border, and we got $2.72. We turned in 272 pounds of rocks. And we went to the corner store and we bought a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, a comic book was a quarter then. So it was, we came back with comic books and candy, and I was eating Ferrara, these little jawbreakers that come in a cardboard box, which tasted much different after I walked through the portal of our house and saw my mom, because I got in massive trouble for that one. But there's, consequences were swift, and they're easy to understand, and they're very clear cut. But some things in consequences are not clear cut at all. They're very, very complicated. For instance, something that you did that no one else knows about. It means you live with it. If you're a hit and run driver, you have just signed up for a life of a dishonest life. I don't know how you live with that day after day. I don't understand it, but there's consequences for these actions. A year ago, one of our assemblers, Nicholas Strickland, passed away. Nick, I haven't told this story really out loud to anyone except my wife, but Nick came to stay with us. He'd been in many houses. He was going through a divorce. He had epilepsy, had 2 small children. He got epilepsy late in life, and he was having a very difficult time just getting through the day. He was a part of our board, and he was part of the kids program, but he'd opted out of the kids program for a while now, or I should say he hadn't done anything with it for months. And eventually he came to stay with my wife and I. And our house is a small house. It's 1,000 square feet, but it's stable, and it's calm, and it's safe. And for a couple of weeks, he just was able to rest. He said he came with an appeal form from the government because he'd appealed for full disability from his epilepsy, because he really couldn't hold down a job. I came to find out that most people get denied the first time for disability. So he had this form to fill out. He also was going to get a job, and he was going to find himself a place to live. This was a temporary place for him to stay. And after a couple of weeks, nothing was happening. I can tell you, I'm a go type person, and intellectually I understood what he was going through, but emotionally, I can tell you, I was frustrated a little bit because day after day, nothing was happening. And he would say he was going to do stuff, but nothing would happen. And I was getting a little frustrated. After the third week, I told him, look, Nick, I've offered help, but let's just do this today. So we started filling out the form. I waited online for the doctor, and we got him a doctor's appointment that day. Nick couldn't even wait 20 seconds on hold. He'd get too frustrated and angry. And Nick was a great guy. It's just he was just having trouble getting through. So we went to the doctor that day. He got another follow-up appointment where he was going to get his medication. And we finished filling out the form for the appeal. We took it to the USPS. We mailed it off together, and we got home and I said, look, Nick, see, together we can do this. I wanted to show him that it was possible to do it. He could find a place. But my wife and I knew by this time that he would never be able to live by himself. He had seizures while we were there. He just couldn't take care of himself. He needed somebody there with him. And if that was going to be us, then we had decided if that's what it had to be, that's what it had to be. On September 7th, he hadn't done this before, but he came into the study where we were, and he asked for a hug. My wife gave him a hug. I gave him a hug, and he asked for another hug from my wife, and she gave him a good long hug. And then he went to bed. The next day, I saw him in the morning. I reminded him that we had agreed that we were going to go up to an assembler's house to see their garden. They live in North County, and they had invited us up to see their lovely home and their garden. And he said he wanted to go still. And he'd had a seizure the night before, and it was a little bit of a tough time for him. But he wanted to go. So I told him, I'm going to go on a bike ride. When I come back, be ready to go because we're going to head up there. So my bike ride was a little bit longer. I got back about 12:10, and Nick wasn't ready to go. I went over to the door, and I could see the light on, and he was sleeping in the bedroom, and I could see his foot through the door, laying on the bed. He was laying on his stomach. And I knew that he couldn't get to these people's house in North County and back to watch his kids at 3 from 12:30. I knew I was going to spend a little more time there. So I was frustrated too. He wasn't ready again, and this had happened over and over. I took a quick shower, and I headed out. At 3:10, I had the visit, by the way, lovely family. They're here today, and thank you for inviting me. It was wonderful. At 3:10 on the way back on the 15 freeway, I got a phone call from his wife asking where Nick was. And I said, well, he was going to go watch the kids. He always showed up, and asked if she'd called him. She said, of course, many times. And I called him and didn't get an answer, and suddenly I had a really bad feeling. The 15 freeway, as you know, in the afternoon, super packed. So aside from it being a long ride, it was a really, really long ride. I got to our house, parked in front, walked in the house, walked over to his bedroom, and I saw through the sliver of the door the light on, and his foot still in the same position. And I knew what I was going to find when I opened the door. Pushed it open, and I saw Nick there. He had passed away. Skin had changed color. And I went over and I touched his neck, and I could feel cold. And I did that thing that people do inexplicably. I don't even understand it myself, but I got really calm, called 911. I called my wife, and I called his wife. Consequences. I will never know if I had checked on Nick earlier, if I could have helped him. He passed away from, it's called, in an autopsy they found that it was sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. It's a fatal complication of epilepsy. It is defined by a sudden and unexpected, non-traumatic and non-drowsy death of a person with epilepsy. And they pass away with their arms folded up under them, and this is exactly how Nick died. But I don't know if I could have helped him, and so I live with the consequences of that. We all need to take a moment to stand up and take a look at our lives and make sure that things that we're doing, who are they affecting? How are they going to affect us? Are we doing the right thing? We're people. We're not going to make the right decisions all the time. but we can be mindful of what we do. I think I could have done a better job that day, and I let my own personal emotions stop me from what I probably always would have done, is just tap on the door saying, "Are you okay?" I don't really have anything more to say about that, but I want to let you know that Nick is deeply missed. And now a moment of silent reflection, please. Thank you very much for allowing me to share that with you. Today we're going to have some announcements, as we always do. If the people making announcements would come to the front, please, we'd really appreciate it. And we are going to start off with Mr. Bartnick.
Hi, folks. October 8th, in the wee hours of the morning at about 5:45, we're going to get together in the Old Town Transit Center and catch the train to go to Carpinteria for the Avocado Festival. Should be a hoot. It's a free festival, but you got to pay for the ticket for the train ride.
Sunday Assembly will be participating in Beautify Chula Vista Day on October 15th. It's a Saturday from 8:30 to 12. It's going to be at Memorial Park. Last year they had about 700 volunteers and picked up more than 14,000 pounds of trash in 2 locations in Chula Vista. You can find more details and sign up to volunteer on the meetup page.
I'm hosting a Rummage Sale on November 5th, Saturday, for Sunday Assembly. Please bring your things you don't want, to the next Sunday Assembly, or contact me for other arrangements. I will need a couple more volunteers, and be sure and put it on your calendar so you can come and shop.
Thank you. And if you really want to get rid of some stuff, you can see Mamie so that you can go there to buy more stuff. It'll be perfect. That's an excellent way to do that. And then, as always, Sunday Assembly is a not-for-profit organization, so we really appreciate your donations, any amount. You can do recurring donations, anything to help make this happen. We really appreciate it. On the trash pickup, you remember we have that beach, so we want to do that as that comes up. We have the Chula Vista cleanup, and I'm always appalled when I see somebody like intentionally litter. It doesn't see it very often. Usually it's people, they set stuff down, but when you see somebody intentionally litter, it's surprising. And one time I was at work, and there was this woman sitting in her car, and she threw trash up. I'd never seen that. It's like that's worse than throwing it down. I don't know why, but I was just horrified. I was at work, I couldn't say anything, and this woman passing by let her have it. And I was like, oh, thank you for doing that. What? Craziness. And once again, Mr. Paul Svensson.
Okay. So let's sit for part of this, and then we'll stand up for part of it. How's that sound? We good? Old gospel song we adapted to what we're doing here. There's a dark and troubled side of life. There's a bright and a sunny side too. Though we meet with the darkness and strife, the sunny side we also may view. Here's the chorus. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day. It will brighten all our way if we keep on the sunny side of life. Let's sing that again. Here we go. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help. It will help us every day. It will brighten all our way if we keep on the sunny side of life. Though the storm and its fury broke today, crushing hopes that we cherish so dear, storms will pass away, and the sun again will shine bright and clear. Now we will stand up, please. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. Oh, it will help us every day. It will brighten all our way if we keep on the sunny side of life. Oh, let us greet with the song of hope each day. Though the moments be cloudy or fair, lend a hand to our neighbors always. Let them know they will be in our care. Sing it now. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day. It will brighten all our way if we keep on the sunny side. Oh, keep on the sunny side, always.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We meet at Pizzicato after we clean up here. That's about between 1 and 1:30 over there, just 2 blocks down and around the corner. And it's time for what y'all come for. We're just hanging out together. Thank you very much for coming to the Sunday Assembly. We'll see you next time when we have the San Diego Ballet Artistic Director. Thank you.